Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cultivating a Multilingual Garden. We're really excited to be here today with Hanif from the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. My name is Mara Gittleman. I am the Workshops and Education Coordinator for NYC Parks GreenThumb. We are the part of the New York City Parks Department that works with community gardens across the city. And we're thrilled to be here today, again with Hanif from the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. We are recording today's webinar and we'll make it available on our website and YouTube channel that I'll put links to in the chat. And so you can decide whether or not your camera is on using the little camcorder icon at the bottom of your screen. But we'll have the recording focused on just the facilitator. So thank you again all so much for coming today. We're looking forward to a great conversation. If you have any questions throughout Hanif's presentation, please put them in the chat, and my colleague Vanessa and I will ask them out loud when it's time for Q&A. Thanks so much, and the mic is yours.
All right, everybody, welcome this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining. This will be my second Parks conference where I'll talk to some of our amazing gardeners about some of the services available to New Yorkers, regardless of immigration or documentation status. And I'm hoping that by learning about these services, by learning about our approach and the philosophy that informs our activities as an office, you can take some of this information, both use it personally if you need it, share it with other members of your garden community, and also use it to maybe inform some of the practices that are in place in your garden to make it a more immigrant-friendly, multilingual, and inclusive environment for your members. So with that, I'm going to start my presentation by sharing some slides and information about MOIA services writ large, right? So I'm going to go through those slides very quickly. I'll be talking about healthcare. I'll be talking about vaccination. I'll be talking about immigration legal services and other things like that. But I'll keep that short. I'll spend most of the time talking about our strategic approach and some of the programming that we do to make sure that our office is meeting immigrant communities where they're at. So with that, I'll start sharing some slides here so that we can get the party started. Okay. And we'll just do this here. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope the conference has been going well for everyone. All right, can folks see that? All right, music not too loud?
Looks good, sounds good.
All right, that's great, that's great. Okay, everybody, so I'm gonna share with you some information about the impact that the pandemic has been having on our community in the city, just really briefly. So when this all started in the beginning, we know here at MOIA that immigrants in our city, mostly frontline workers in the city, are immigrants. This is one of the most immigrant-heavy cities in the country. 3 million foreign-born New Yorkers, almost 500,000 undocumented New Yorkers, overrepresented, disproportionately represented in those fields that we consider to be quote-unquote essential. Nurses, home health aides, cooks, janitors, building cleaners, laundry workers and attendants, people who weren't able to self-isolate, weren't able to remain in their homes in the early days of the pandemic.
Hey, Hanif.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry to ruin the vibe, but the music is interfering a bit with the audio.
Understood.
It's like coming in and out.
Let's go ahead and turn that off. Can you hear me well now?
Yes. Now
right.
Your voice is louder. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, there you go. Man, looking forward to that vibe, but we'll try to keep it peppy. So immigrant communities in our city, right, disproportionately required to be outside their homes in the early days of the pandemic, disproportionately impacted by this virus. And that's why the work that we do as an office in partnership with other city agencies, programs, community groups is so important. It's about serving our immigrant communities where they are. We also know that there's a racial gap when it comes to the impact of COVID-19. Black New Yorkers twice as likely to be severely impacted, fatally impacted by the virus. Latinx New Yorkers 1.5 times more likely. And then immigrants in our city, more likely to have lost their jobs or income, afraid of seeking out services, even when they are available out of fear of immigration status and other things like that. So I'm going to get into some of those dynamics in a bit as well. So we have this vaccination effort in the city. You may have seen these vans all over town, about 10 vans all over the city. Almost half or more of New Yorkers are getting vaccinated at these vaccine buses. You may have seen them in your neighborhood. And if you have a garden location or a large garden event, or if there are sites that you as leaders in your community would recommend to us, I'll always be a resource that I can hear from you about locations that you would recommend having us send our buses out there. They vaccinate with Pfizer, with Johnson & Johnson, with other vaccines as needed, and we'll send folks out there. Don't need an appointment. You just go to one of these locations, you bring a form of identification, and that's it. No questions asked. They'll get you set up with that vaccine. An important part of bringing a service to a community. And the way that intersects with the gardening world is that the garden is sometimes an important node for community development and engagement. And so having a vaccine bus there or having other services there could make your garden an important source of compounded benefit to the local community. So we have these city-run sites. You can find out this information from the various websites that I have on the screen. Vax for NYC, that's a phone number that you can call. And again, just worth reminding everybody, the vaccine is free. So anybody who tries to charge you for a vaccine, they're trying to pull a scam. Vaccine is free. It's one of those few things that in our healthcare system is totally free, no questions asked. So take advantage of that and encourage others to do it as well. Won't spend too much time. I think you've heard 1,000 times now conversation about preventing the spread of COVID, but we always want to share people, read people in on the information about that core four. So, staying home, 6 feet apart, masking, washing hands wherever possible and necessary. And that's how we can protect our communities. And then the testing sites are everywhere too. And again, you're running a community garden, you're involved in your gardening space. COVID testing can happen near where you're establishing your garden, or finding out what test sites are near that garden can help you direct your members to a nearby testing location so they can get those tested regularly. I won't get into too much information about the test and trace core, but again, some of your members would benefit from knowing that occasionally the test and trace core will give them a call. And so they should see that number on their screen, on the left-hand side of your screen. That's what it shows up as in your caller ID. Pick up those phone calls, but remember, they're never going to ask you some personal, private, financial, or social security information. Someone asks you something like that, know that it's a scam. They're not calling in good faith. The test and trace core will not ask you questions like that. They'll ask you who you've been in contact with, where you've been, things like that, in order to see where spread is possible. Then we have a hotel accommodation program. So if you or somebody in your household is testing positive and you want to isolate for any reason, maybe you have a job that requires you to take some extra precautions, the city has a hotel accommodation program. These are all things that you can tell people about when they come into your garden. And my goal is to empower you as folks who are active in your garden to be able to answer questions for people who come in. None of us is really an island in this city, and we'll answer questions about all sorts of different programs and services. And that's what adds value to us when we're out there in the field. Again, if you're interested in that hotel program, 1-212-COVID-19, you call that number, 212-268-4319. And if you need to stay in that hotel up to 10 days for free, stay in that hotel, meals are provided, and you'll be able to isolate in case of necessity. Good idea to know that our city has a public hospital system. So the hospital system includes services for people regardless of immigration or documentation status. The number one way for you to ensure that your garden is an inclusive space in our city, a city with 500,000 undocumented New Yorkers, is to reinforce for your members that services are available regardless of documentation status in our city. They should be engaged and plugged in to the communities that they live in. One important message we have in the city is that we want to do whatever we can to make sure that documentation status is not a barrier to inclusion in our city. Our country unfortunately discriminates against people on the basis of documentation status. It's wrong. it's discriminatory, it's unjust. But in our city, we live in that reality, but we also try to recognize the most important thing about you is that you live in our city and that you're a New Yorker. Your documentation status should not be a barrier to you accessing services. Unfortunately, certain federal programs, they still are a barrier, but here in our city, we try to mitigate that. NYC Care, again, another important program, and we can have information sent to your garden, to your group about any of these programs. If you want to put material collateral out there for people to pick up, nyccare.nyc is a free, low-cost, free or low-cost health insurance, a sliding scale health insurance program, especially for folks who are worried about their documentation status. They can take advantage of this program. So I encourage you to look into that. Get Covered NYC, again, health insurance plan available to New Yorkers across the spectrum. You're worried about your health insurance, you text Get Covered NYC to 877-877, you call 311, you say health insurance. Anything I say today, it's as easy as calling 311 and saying those keywords, and someone will set you up. 311, by the way, they have access to language line. It's simultaneously interpreted. You just say the name of your language and you can get those 311 services in your language. One of the programs that I'm really passionate about, and I'm going to show you a video later on about how we use these programs to make our city more inclusive, is IDNYC. I don't know if we can really show hands here, but has anyone heard of IDNYC? Does anyone have an IDNYC? All right, seeing some thumbs up. Excellent. Now, IDNYC, I joined city government in 2015, believe it or not, so long ago, because I heard our commissioner at the time speaking about IDNYC at the Tenement Museum. And when I heard she was giving a speech about the Hart-Celler Act of 1965, it was the Immigration Naturalization Act, which opened up the United States to immigration from many quote unquote non-Western countries. And she was talking about IDNYC. And she said, in New York City, you can get an ID card regardless of who you are or where you're from. And it's one ID card that we all have that doesn't show your immigration status. That we're all equals, we're all New Yorkers, at least according to this card. And I found it so compelling that I decided to join city government after that. This IDNYC is a card that you can obtain for free at our enrollment sites. Capacity is a little lower right now because of COVID, but you can still get this ID card. You can renew it every 5 years, get a lot of benefits to different museums and cultural institutions. And here's the kicker: behind that card, there's an opportunity for you to put your two preferred languages. So let's say that you're a Pakistani immigrant in our city. Your first language is Urdu. Your second language is Punjabi. Put both of those languages on the back of your card. Get counted and receive services in those languages. Go to a place of service delivery in our city, or you're interacting with the police department, you're interacting with somebody, showing your identity for the purpose of employment, showing your identity to get into some of these cultural institutions and museums for free and so on. Show that card and enjoy those benefits. Even more than that, it's a symbol of our commitment to make the city inclusive. For all New Yorkers, regardless of the language they speak, regardless of where they're from. And we use IDNYC as a program to bring people in, and it's a catalyst to make sure that they deepen their engagement with the city and they access all sorts of other programs. So IDNYC is a physical, tangible thing that people can have in their hand, and that enables them to really feel more connected to the city. We also want to make sure that people who are not undocumented get this card, right? So that it becomes something that we all have, and it becomes a symbol of being a New Yorker, regardless of your immigration status. Here's what it looks like. This is the new design. When I started the program that had a different design, here's the new design. It looks great, and it's easy to get. And you have to do some things to prove your residency and your identity before you get the card. But there's a long list of things, kind of like going to the DMV, kind of showing some points. But it's much easier than the DMV. There's hundreds of different varieties and combinations of documents that you could potentially show. Try to make the program as accessible as possible. Now, I know that some members of your community may come to you and they may say, hey, listen, I need food assistance. I need housing assistance. I'm afraid of accessing these services because I'm afraid the government is going to be retributive against me because of a public charge. I heard something about public charge. Public charge is a rule that came about initially to make things difficult for the Irish back in the day, and to make things difficult for an immigrant who was viewed as being a burden on the public. And we know that rhetoric like that is wrong and unjust. And so we pushed back against this rule. And fortunately, it was blocked nationwide. So during the Trump years, our office spent a lot of time challenging this public charge rule and making sure that immigrants in our city access benefits to which they were entitled. They didn't forego important health and food and other types of benefits because they were afraid of the, retributive impact on their immigration status. We want to make sure that people are accessing benefits, even if they're undocumented, even if they are immigrants, even if they are, worried about immigration status. But we want to make sure that people are not foregoing safe benefits out of fear. So we're glad to see that public charge rule blocked nationwide. And to that end, the office established a program called Action NYC. Action NYC, a free immigration legal services program. So if you're an immigrant in this city, if you know someone who's an immigrant in this city, which is 100% of us, right? Every single person on this call is either an immigrant or knows someone who's an immigrant. Every single one of you serves immigrants in your garden. And every single one of those immigrants has had interactions with the immigration system that has left them feeling like, worried, concerned. Even if you are from a country, let's say you're a British citizen and you come to the United States and you think everything's gonna be easy. The immigration system by itself is just so hard to navigate. And we know that that's really difficult for folks in our communities. So we have this free hotline that you can call, get set up with immigration legal services for free. And we want to make sure that everyone's taking advantage of that opportunity. Okay. I won't get into too many of these things, but just give you a snapshot, right? Burial assistance. Many of us lost loved ones to this pandemic. There's burial assistance for folks in the city. Get up to $1,700 to assist in the burial of a loved one. And FEMA has an additional assistance as well. New York City has, funds available for this type of thing. And we encourage you to go and look into that. You can call 311, say burial assistance, and they'll give you some support there. Counseling, the garden, again, is an important part of mental health and emotional health in the community. It's an important part of our social healing. But we know that some people, they need to talk to somebody on the phone, by text. There's a number there. You can call in over 200 languages, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You call crisis counseling, peer support, short-term counseling, other things like that, called NYC Well. And we encourage people to take advantage of that if that's something that they want. Many people, they come to your garden because it's an important place of gathering, and they come there as they are. They come there with all the successes in their life. They come there with hardships, and they'll come there and they'll come to you with questions. So it's important for us to be able to answer one of the top questions in our community, which is about housing and eviction. So remember that eviction moratorium, it's in place until August 31st. No landlord can evict you from your home until that time. And you sign a hardship declaration, and that lets you benefit from that eviction moratorium. Really important. Remember that the landlord themselves cannot evict you. So if a landlord tries to evict you, they're breaking the law. Call the police. That landlord will be prosecuted. Landlord cannot evict you only if they receive a judgment from a marshal, and then a city marshal, actually law enforcement, can evict somebody. Landlord cannot lock you out of your house. So if they try to do that, you call 911 or you call your local precinct. Landlord tries to evict you from your home, change the locks, things like that. They're breaking the law. They can't do that. Here's something that we've seen landlords do on occasion. Threaten people. Employers try to do it, landlords try to do it. Threaten people by threatening to call ICE on them. Can you imagine? There are people out there that do this. Threaten to call ICE on a tenant if they don't leave. That's illegal. If you do that, $250,000 fine, up to $250,000 fine. So really make sure that you're reporting issues like that to the City Commission on Human Rights. Again, that's the City Commission on Human Rights, and they will provide you with some recourse and redress, and they'll take your complaint. Do not weaponize immigration enforcement, our broken immigration system against other New Yorkers, your neighbors and fellow New Yorkers, in order to harass or intimidate them. I want you to know that that kind of behavior is not tolerated. It's unjust, and it's also unlawful. And then there's a tenant support hotline, right? So people are going to come to your garden. They're going to have questions about how to support themselves. You just direct them to that tenant support hotline. Call 311 and say tenant helpline. All right. And then, again, New Yorkers can access benefits through AccessHRA. Make sure you're knowing about AccessHRA. And I'm going to send a copy of these slides so that you don't have to worry about taking too many notes this afternoon. AccessHRA. We have the Fasten program. Again, that's a tenant support program. And I'm happy to answer any questions about these programs as well. So if people come in, they want, you know, a one-shot deal, they need financial support for a lot of, you know, what they're dealing with housing-wise, we want to make sure that they're getting access to these services. The Fasten programs for folks who are ineligible for the one-shot deal. One-shot deal is a financial benefit the HRA gives people. It's one shot. It's a financial kind of support to prevent eviction. Fasten program is for folks who are not eligible for one-shot deal. So all these options in place. Here are locations that basically help you with those one-shot deal and Fasten applications. And then no New Yorker should go hungry. So your garden may be close to a meal hub. So anybody comes into your garden and they're asking for you know, food assistance, they should know that they come to your garden and they'll be able to get information about where to get free meals, right? So every New Yorker is entitled to free meals if they need them. There are 200 meal hubs citywide. There's halal options, there's kosher options, there's vegetarian options. It's not, you know, five-star cuisine, but it's emergency food aid for people who need it. And it's healthy, nutritious food for you to benefit from, and it's free. No questions asked. There's even a delivery option. So people can get food delivered to their homes from the city free of charge. And it's for people who are unable to leave their home. They're worried about the impact of COVID. They're COVID vulnerable and they need that service. They call 311. They say, get food. Call 311, get food. We have a We Speak program for English learners who are trying to learn English language. I want to emphasize that, you know, learning English is not what makes you a New Yorker or something that you have to do to be a New Yorker, but it's an important skill for a lot of people in their employment and in their lives. And so we have a free English language learning program. And you can go to We Speak NYC to take advantage of that. There's even a series of videos, some great videos that you can access to learn about those things. Many of your gardeners and many of your community members may be small business owners. So they can go to nyc.gov/business and take advantage of a series of webinars. Is bit.ly/SBS webinars. They can access that website, get support for your small business, and to make sure that you are basically not foregoing some of those benefits that you're entitled to as a small business owner. Most small businesses in this city, many of them owned by immigrant communities who have done a lot to kind of sustain their communities. And you may have some of those small business owners near your garden as well. And there are these business solution centers, again, that you can take advantage of if you're a small business owner in our city. Here's a summary of the resources. I won't go into too much detail, but here's a summary of those important resources that we want everybody to know about. So again, IDNYC, that ID card, Action NYC, those immigration legal services. Remember that test and trace core, get yourself tested, get yourself vaccinated if you need it, and then access those healthcare options through NYC Care. One thing I want to show everybody is, so now I'm gonna, with that, I'll stop to take any questions if you have them, but I also want to get into the part of the presentation that I'm most excited by. And that's talking to this group about some of the experiences that we've had as an office, making our city more inclusive and setting up events that are aimed at making the city more accessible to immigrant communities. So it's one thing to put these services out there. It's another thing to really make sure that immigrant communities are accessing these services. And so here are a few things that we have learned over the years and a few strategies that we have deployed to make our services more inclusive and to make our spaces more inclusive, especially around the issue of language. And I know this website, this webinar is about cultivating multilingual gardens. So here's step number one. We have a three-step approach, 3 pillars of our approach to language justice in our city. The first one is language access. Identify the language needs in your community and provide access in those languages. It's about people who need to access a service in a certain language. Maybe they're monolingual, right? They're an Arabic speaker, they're Urdu speaker, they're a Bangla speaker, they're a Yiddish speaker, monolingual, and they just need access to that information. The first pillar is language access. And for that, we have a language access team that provides interpretation, that provides translation, and that provides documents, makes sure that the documents that we are presenting in different spaces, they're in the languages of people who speak those languages in that area. Language access is the first pillar. And when you're cultivating a multilingual garden, make sure that when you're providing something in a language, you're not using Google Translate, you're not using a website, you're using the human translator, human written translation, verbal translation, to make sure that people are honored when they receive information in that language. And that takes me to the next pillar, language affirmation. Sometimes people don't need information in a certain language, but just seeing their language displayed in your garden, in public life, will be a signal to them that they are welcome, that they belong there, right? I'm an Iranian, I'm a Persian speaker. If I go around the city and I see a sign in the Persian language, I would lose my mind. I would be so happy. It would really make my day. And I know from experience, going out into the community, and when we put go to Jackson Heights and we put a Tibetan sign up, when we go to Harlem or parts of the South Bronx and there's a Twi sign up or a Mende sign up, or if we go to a Yiddish speaking neighborhood, we put a Yiddish sign, a Punjabi neighborhood, Gujarati neighborhood, people see their languages visually, and it means I welcome you, you matter, you exist, we know that you exist. And that brings us to our third pillar, language awareness. So we have access, affirmation, third is awareness. A lot of people in the city, a lot of people at other city agencies, they don't know about the depth of the linguistic diversity in our city. New York City is the most linguistically diverse city in the history of the human species. Never in the history of humanity have more languages existed in one city in these numbers. More than 300 languages are spoken in our city, just according to the DOE. And there are many more that we don't know about. There are languages whose primary place right now is New York City. There are more speakers of that language in New York City than in their indigenous environments. I'll give you a fun fact that we learned from the Endangered Languages Alliance, an important partner for us. 5% of Mexicans don't speak Spanish as their first language. But in New York City, 15%, nearly 15% of Mexican New Yorkers don't speak Spanish as their first language. That means that the proportion of indigenous language speakers among Mexican immigrants or among immigrants to New York City is much higher. They're disproportionately represented. And here's what we're also finding, which is really sad, that immigrant communities are not passing on indigenous languages to their children. So the Mixteco speakers, the Nahuatl speakers, the Quiche, the Quichua speakers in our city, from South and Central America, Garifuna speakers, they're not passing these languages on to their children, and that's because there's a stigma associated with those languages. It's important for people to see their languages displayed, honored, recognized. And one way that we do this every year is through a celebration every February 21st called International Mother Language Day. International Mother Language Day happened as a result of the Bangladeshi War of Independence and things like that. I won't get into too much of that history, but in the 1970s, it emerged as an international holiday recognized by the United Nations. And here in New York City, we recognize every year International Mother Language Day. And that's a day when we go out there and say, you have a right to speak your language in public. No one has a right to tell you to speak English. If anybody does, they're violating our human rights norms in the city, and they're subject to a complaint. Nobody can force you to speak English. No one can prevent you from teaching your language to your children. And the city has an affirmative obligation to meet your language needs when you have them. And so it's really important to just cultivate, so Sister Sohair is saying we could see Arabic at the voting polls, really important. Part of making sure that our city is inclusive to everybody. So make sure that you are proactively cultivating and resisting attempts to erase the languages of our city. Many communities that came in previous generations, they only allowed their children to speak English in their home, thinking that it would help assimilation and help them in school and things like that. Now we know that children who grow up speaking 2 languages, 3 languages, they learn all those languages better. It's so important for their cognitive development. How do we embrace multilingualism as a city? Well, the garden is an important part of that. A few years ago, we teamed up with the GreenThumb to create a open garden video. But I'm going to show you right now that brought together so many different immigrant communities, and each one talked about what the garden meant to them. So imagine a garden where, Bangla speakers and Spanish speakers and Yiddish speakers or, Arabic speakers are all together, they're gardening, they're united and they're connected in that one space. Really important stuff. I'm going to share with you a series of videos that we did as an office to basically demonstrate some of those values of affirmation and awareness. So when we were doing an IDNYC campaign a few years ago to teach people and to encourage them to get the IDNYC, we basically decided to create a series of videos in various languages. I will find these for you right now and display them. Bring that up for you right now. You can see this.
IDNYC.
One moment. Find these right now, and we will get y'all set up with these videos, just to give you a sample, a taste of some of what we're doing as a city. So if you go to here, I'm going to share the screen with you now. Okay, can everybody see that? Yeah, all set. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of some of the videos that we did. Now there's a room in City Hall. It's called the Blue Room. The Blue Room is one of the most important and prestigious rooms at City Hall. And it's where the mayor goes to make big announcements. If there's a hurricane, if there's some other big issue, he goes to the Blue Room and the press go there. And we said, we're going to go film a series of videos in the Blue Room. And we're going to take people from different linguistic communities in our city and we're going to seat them there. And we're going to have them talk about the IDNYC program. And we want to specifically pick people from communities where the language has not been recognized as much as it should be. And we want to send a message that those languages belong in a place of power. Those languages belong in our city. And so I'll play you, so if you see here on the side, you see there in Fulani, languages of West Africa, Garifuna, it's an indigenous language of South Central America. So, it's Indonesian. I'll play you the Indonesian video. You can take a look.
IDNYC sudah
Can everyone hear that?
5 tahun yang lalu untuk semua orang yang tinggal di New York City. Kita semua adalah bagian dari New York. Bahasa ibu kita adalah bagian dari New York. Kita semua memiliki hak yang sama.
That's the Indonesian IDNYC video. We have it in Wolof, in Arabic, in Kiiche, Quechua. Maybe you've heard of some of these languages, maybe you have not. Here's our Quechua video. This is a language of South America, from the Andean region. We brought in members of the community themselves who were basically known in the community. And I just love the videos. It's the first time I'm hearing somebody. So with that, I'm going to conclude, but I just want to leave you with those 3 values: language affirmation, awareness, and access. Make sure that your garden is a place where someone who speaks another language can come and see their own language reflected. Make sure when they come, about the 311 services and things like that, and you can talk to them about those services, and you have maybe items printed out from different cities, agencies in the languages that people speak in your garden. Make sure that you, if it's possible, are providing interpretation at some of your events. One organization that does this really well is a Street Vendor Project. Everyone's got a headset on, a 2-way headset, and they hire interpreters to come, and they conduct meetings in 3 or 4 languages simultaneously. Have in-language events at your garden. So if there's a large Mandarin-speaking population, have a Mandarin hour where people come in and they learn from fluent Mandarin speakers. Do in-language events when you can. And then finally, do awareness events like International Mother Language Day that bring people together every February 21st to celebrate the linguistic diversity of the community and have an opportunity to really engage with one another and learn about each other's languages, cultivate pride in multilingualism in your garden and in your community. And so I know that's a lot of information. Those are a lot of things that I've talked about this afternoon, but if there are any questions or feedback that you have, or even things you want to share about your experience, maybe speaking another language in the city, or things that you'd like to see happen in the city, this is a good opportunity for us to just have a conversation about all of that.
Great. Thanks so very much. Maybe just to get us started with a little bit of conversation. We did have a question early on, and you've discussed many of these, but are there any additional tips for facilitating a multilingual meeting that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, so facilitating multilingual meeting, I've seen it happen successfully in many locations. So I'll just build on what I said briefly. There's hardware that you can purchase, these two-way headsets, and someone wears the headsets, and then you have a live interpreter, speaking into the headset from the target, from the input language to the target language. So let's say you're doing a meeting in Korean and in Bangla, or Korean and or Urdu, for example, right? So half of them speak Bangla, half of them speak Urdu, right? And let's say some people speak English, right? So everyone's got a headset on, and then you've got two interpreters, one that goes from English to Bangla, one that goes from English to Korean, right? So when somebody presents, those interpreters speak into a microphone, and then they feed the simultaneous, seamless sort of interpretation into the ears of the people wearing their headsets based on the channel that they're tuned to. So it's not it sounds complicated when I'm saying it, but it's not too complicated in action. And it works really well. And so I've seen at various meetings, people are speaking to each other in different languages. So an Arabic speaker will get up and say something in Arabic, and then a Mandarin speaker will answer in Mandarin, and they'll be speaking to each other, but they'll both be wearing these headsets where they're hearing the interpreted language fed into them. And so that's one way I've seen it happen live in person, and it's a strategy that we use. Zoom has a feature, if you have access to Zoom, where you can assign an interpreter to kind of use that interpretation function. And we've seen it done successfully sometimes. Another thing we've done is, if you're having a meeting and you don't have access to that Zoom function, sometimes I start a conference call line, and someone calls, similar at the UN, Sister Sohair is saying. So another way is you call a conference call line, and the interpreter calls that conference call line, and they're using the phone as basically a headset. So I'm listening to this meeting, and somebody else is pumping in that new language into that conference call line in order to make sure that everyone has access. I don't want to get too into the weeds about the technical side here. There's all sorts of different, the city doesn't supply the headsets and mics, unfortunately, for events that we don't do ourselves. But if we're doing an event, we do have access to those. And like if there's a mayoral forum or something like that, then we will kind of use our mics. But we're encouraging other city agencies to do this, and we're pushing to, let's see, maybe in the future someday we'll have some of these. Oh, great, excellent. Looks like GreenThumb has a set of those mics and headphones to facilitate some of those multilingual meetings. The ideal situation is having an in-language meeting. So we're trying to move towards that too, a totally seamless A to Z experience in the language. I think is really the goal.
Great, thank you. If anybody wants to add any further thoughts to that, you can use the chat. You can also unmute. You're welcome to do that in this situation. We exist in a very informal way sometimes. Is there anything additional that anyone in the room or Hanif, if you'd like to add, for some solutions that work when you're sitting around in the garden without any technology, in many cases without even a smartphone available?
Well, there's also consecutive interpretation. So let's say you don't have a headset at all, right? This is the low-tech version. Let's say that you don't have any technology, you don't have any headsets, but you want to run a multilingual meeting. So you bring people up in the front, you make sure that they're well-versed in the languages, and you do a meeting. It takes longer to do the meeting, but it's worth it. So things will be interpreted consecutively. So I'll say something and then the interpreter will say the thing.
Absolutely. Taking that time and that space is really important. Sometimes it's easy to want to rush through a meeting to get to the point, but we need to make sure everybody is heard. Yes, Mara put in the chat here, please share your tips. If you have experience with multilingual meetings, we will share them with everyone. In the meantime, a question might relate to us. We've offered multilingual programs or live interpretation at programs, but very few people who need interpretation ever find out about them. How can we do better outreach?
Yeah, this is a really good question because, you know, providing interpretation isn't easy or cheap sometimes because you have to hire an interpreter. Maybe even the interpreter's time is important. Here's the thing. There's a difference between accommodating people and designing something with them in mind. If the interpretation is just an accommodation, very few people will come. But if you design an event with Chinese speakers in mind, with Arabic speakers in mind, with Spanish speakers in mind, then everything from your outreach material is going to be in Spanish, and the tweets that you put out to encourage people to come are going to be in Spanish, and the stakeholders that you call to say, hey, I want to put together an event for my garden that is a open and accessible and welcoming for Spanish speakers. Connect with a local organization in your community and say, we want to do this. Can we partner with you? Can we co-sponsor with you to make sure that we are guaranteeing 5, 10, 15, 20 Spanish speakers who are interested in gardening are coming to our event? Bring the partner into the process of planning the event, into the process of mobilizing people to come to the event. Don't throw in interpretation as an afterthought when all the outreach has been done, or most of the outreach has been done with English-speaking partners. Bring those multilingual partners into the, because language is more than just a way of communicating. It's a whole culture, and it's a whole way of life, and it's a whole identity. So you can't just serve the language and ignore the people who speak the language. You've got to bring those people into the conversation from day one to ensure that they're going to actually be there and take advantage of the interpretation.
We have a question in the chat. Do you have any recommendations for resources that garden groups or community groups could access for meetings when GreenThumb or city staff can't be present to provide interpretation? I guess this is in the situation where the group itself doesn't have the ability to translate due to language barriers.
I think, I don't know about free services, but one thing I can recommend is this. If someone told me, I'm a Persian language speaker, right? And if I was in a local garden and I was active in my local garden and I was passionate about making sure that my garden was open to other Afghans and Iranians and Persian language speakers in my neighborhood. If I was really invested in that garden and in that mission and I felt included, I'd be willing to interpret for that meeting and to be part of communicating the messages, just like any other English speaker would, in engaging and bringing people into that garden. And so what I would recommend is that, you know, if there are members of your community who are passionate about including the speakers of languages that they speak, really bring them into the process. And sometimes you'll find that people are willing to help facilitate those meetings in a volunteer basis, just like others are. Many, you know, a lot of people volunteer in the garden in many other ways. Make sure that that role is validated and it is honored and respected and considered an essential function of running a garden. Even if it's a volunteer position, it's just as important as the person who's budding and pruning and, you know, taking care of the chickens and cultivating some of the other outreach for English speakers.
Great. So I want to invite folks, if you have any further questions, please add them in the chat. Those are all the ones that I have listed right now. So we'll take a minute, create a little space for further thoughts.
While we're waiting for more questions, I just want to say thank you, Hanif. That was a great presentation. We're really grateful for all of the work that you do and all of the work that MOIA does And thank you for partnering with GreenThumb and partnering with so many other city agencies to help us serve a much wider public than we are otherwise able to. So we really appreciate the work that you do. And thank you everyone for coming to today's webinar.